Before we take a look at Cyborg 009, I want to take a look at the man who created the series. So first, I'm going to tell you a little story. Shotaro Onodera was born January 25th, 1938, in the Miyagi Prefecture of Japan. From a young age, Shotaro loved to draw, though his father discouraged his drawings as he thought it would distract him from attaining a real job. Shotaro was encouraged by his sister Yoshie, and with her encouragement, he would eventually go on to create a doujinshi, or independent manga, called Ink Drop, that published manga from contributors across the country. It was in this manga where Shotaro would credit himself under the pen name Shotaro Ishinomori, named for his birthplace, the city of Ishinomaki. This doujinshi caught the attention of Osamu Tezuka, who sent a telegram to Ishinomori to come to Tokyo and work as his assistant. Ishinomori was only 15 years old, but he took the opportunity, and would eventually move to Tokyo permanently, where he roomed with many manga authors in the Tokiwaso apartment building. Ishinomori's sister Yoshie would eventually come to Tokiwaso to see her brother against her mother's wishes. Yoshie had debilitating asthma that would sometimes lead to seizures, and her mother felt that the city would make her condition worse. However, Yoshie and Shotaro felt it would be a worthwhile trade-off since the city had better doctors. On April 4th, 1958, Yoshie had to be admitted to the hospital because of her condition, but she assured her brother she would be fine. Ishinomori went to see a movie, but when he returned, he was told that Yoshie had passed away. Overcome with stress and depression following his sister's death, Ishinomori traveled overseas. Leaving Japan wasn't something anyone could do at that time, but since he worked as a reporter for a publishing house, he was able to obtain a temporary departure permit. While traveling, Ishinomori would come across the July 11th, 1960 issue of Life magazine, containing an article about the concept of cyborgs. Having traveled the world, Ishinomori was inspired to create a team of superheroes from across the globe, all of whom would be cyborgs. He decided on 9 because you need 9 players on a baseball team, and drew inspiration from Alfred Bester's sci-fi novels like The Demolished Man and The Star's My Destination. The cyborgs would fight against an evil organization, the Black Ghost, led by a maniacal skull-masked leader, inspired by the titular villain of the American film serial, The Crimson Ghost. The series began publication in the summer of 1964, and went on to spawn a franchise with new entries still releasing to this day. When people ask me where to begin with the Cyborg 009 franchise, I always point them to the 2001 anime. I believe it's the best entry point. Prior to this series, 009 had 2 television adaptations and 3 movies. However, Ishinomori was never satisfied with these adaptations due to the changes imposed by the studios. I always compare the 2001 anime though to the X-Men animated series, since it adapts all of the most well-known stories from the comics history and retells them in a way that both modernizes them while also fixing some of the writing issues present in the original versions, essentially creating what some would call the definitive version of the stories and characters. For some examples of the issues that plagued these earlier adaptations, the first adaptations of 009 were the Cyborg 009 Toei film and its sequel, Cyborg 009 Monster Wars, wherein 007 was portrayed as a 9-year-old kid because Toei wanted a character that was the same age as their intended audience. Toei used the character sheets for these films when they created the 1968 TV series, so for the entirety of that series, 007 was still a child. They also reused the theme songs from the films, which is why the first thing they mention in the song is Joe's scarf being red, despite the series being in black and white. Though I will say they corrected Joe's design and gave him back his iconic bangs. What's interesting about this series, though, is that screenwriter Masaki Tsuji was adamant in his drive to retain the manga's serious message dealing with the dangers of war and hatred. Depictions of war, especially in children's shows, were considered taboo, as Japan was still recovering from the Second World War, and the series was even considered controversial when it first aired. Though many references to World War II present in the manga were removed, like the infamous scene of Joe punching a penguin, who, in the manga, is stated to be a Nazi in disguise, but in the anime is instead a member of the much vaguer group, the Black Cross Army.
Heil Black Cross! Heil Black Cross!
Main villain the Skull was reduced to a Monster of the Week villain, sporting different designs in his 2 appearances, leading some to question whether or not these are supposed to be the same character. His terrorist group is also reduced to him and just him and Von Vogt. Oh, did I say Von Vogt? I'm sorry, I meant Baron King. I don't know the exact reason for this change, but I think it's to make the name easier for Japanese children to remember, since it's a name that will convey that the character is foreign, as in not from Japan, but also isn't as hard to say or remember since the letter V has a lot of ambiguity, and that's why you got a lot of translations of Von Vogt's name in the West, calling him everything from Von Vogt to Van Bagoot.
What an odd way to meet! You're Klaus Van Bagoot, if I'm not mistaken.
Despite all the series' changes to avoid mentions of war, episode 15 adapted the immigration arc, which surrounds a group of time travelers who come to the present because in their time, 300 years in the future, atomic war has ravaged the Earth and turned people into horrible mutants. This was especially controversial since discrimination against people who were burned or deformed by the atomic bombs was hugely prevalent in Japanese culture, with TV networks running PSAs and schools hanging up posters, all trying to explain to children why not to make fun of these people, and specifically not to call them monsters. Things were getting pretty tense when it comes to relationships between the 009 writers' room and NET, the television network airing the show, who were getting a lot of complaints about the show. Masaki Tsuji said, "Okay, hold on. I'll make everything better. This next episode, what if the ghosts of World War II pilots come back to bomb Pearl Harbor again?" And the network said, "Okay, well, thank God, that one won't be controversial." Would it shock you to find out this series was cancelled? The second series ran from 1979 to 1980 and was a collaboration between Toei and Sunrise. The series was directed by Votem's creator Ryosuke Takahashi, whose vision of the series clashed with Ishinomori. Allegedly, Ishinomori wanted the series to adapt stories directly from his manga, while Takahashi wanted to tell original stories. The first 9 episodes adapt the Edda arc of the manga, about the cyborgs fighting Norse gods, similar to the Greek gods in the Mythos arc. It was around the end of this arc where Ishinomori stepped away from the anime due to conflicts with Takahashi and his already busy schedule. The following 2 arcs of the anime were exclusive, though the final arc is the Neo Black Ghost arc, which was the current arc going on in the manga at the time, but is different from the anime's rendition with a different plot and characters. The Neo Black Ghost arc was intended to run until episode 52, and would be followed up with a 13-episode adaptation of the Mythos arc. However, the series actually got cancelled, and the Neo Black Ghost arc was wrapped up at episode 50, ending the series. On January 28, 1998, Shotaro Ishinomori passed away, but like some sort of weird mythical phoenix of some kind, his death brought about new interest in his works. In 2000, Kamen Rider was revived on Japanese television to great success, and that same year came an animated adaptation of Ishinomori's Android Kikaider. With all the hype surrounding Ishinomori, it makes sense that probably one of his most iconic series would get a reboot. The series was promoted as the story and characters as they were meant to be portrayed from the mind of Shotaro Ishinomori himself.
Faithful to the original work, the stories depict the characters as intended by the author.
The series adapted what was widely considered the 4 essential Cyborg 009 storylines, while adapting a decent amount of other iconic stories throughout the comic's history in between these arcs. The 4 essential 009 story arcs are Birth, The Assassins, Mythos, and Yomi, with Yomi, Ishinomori's original ending to the series, acting as the 2001 anime's series finale. In between these overarching episodes are adaptations of other stories from the series run like Monster Island, Kubikuro, and the Immigration arc. Before production began, several changes were made to modernize the story as well as make it more suitable for international viewers. Most of the changes were the idea of Shinsuke Onishi, who was also the most prominent writer on the series. In order to maintain 004's backstory, which revolved around his wife's death at the hands of communists while fleeing from East Germany, it was decided that the first 400 cyborgs would have been created in the 60s, only to be placed in suspended animation until the technology was more advanced. 004 would also have his bitter personality switched with 002's more laid-back personality. Another aspect that needs to be acknowledged about Cyborg 009 is the blackface. 008's design was inspired by the depiction of black characters in Western cartoons, but the racial insensitivity associated with this art wasn't as well known in Japan. I doubt Ishinomori would intentionally include a character intended to be derogatory in a series with scenes dubbed controversial for things like this.
しかしそれならなぜこんな島でこそこそやらないで国連へ正式に申し入れないんだ。笑わせるな。色が白い黒いというだけで争いをしている君たちだと。ところが我々はご覧の通りの化け物揃い。
Ishinomori is far from the only artist to depict black characters this way, with many Japanese artists using this depiction even as late as the 1980s with Akira Toriyama's Dragon Ball. Words and images deemed offensive in the West have a tendency to make their way onto Japanese television pretty frequently, even to this day.
Shit! 行くぞ!
The most egregious example I can think of was the children's show Miburi TV, where a presenter actually went on wearing a onesie with a bunch of English phrases on it, and it said things like, "I love cock," and I heart love fuck yeah. So to clarify, my point isn't saying that this is okay or that this is something that should be embraced, but rather I'm just laying out the context that it isn't due to hatred, but rather just ignorance that stuff like this made its way into Ishinomori's earlier works. When the 1980's 009 film went into production, Toei knew from the start they wanted an international release. Jeff Siegel, who'd actually later go on to create the cartoon Exo Squad, worked with them as a consultant and advised them that 008's design would have to be changed if they wanted a positive reception in the West, and so the design was changed to his new appearance, inspired by actor Sidney Poitier. There were plenty of other changes made to the series, but I'll be addressing those as I get to them. My plan is to break down and review every episode of the series from episode 1 through episode 48, as well as comparing the story and scenes to the original manga and any previous adaptations.
In an effort to dominate robotic warfare, the secret organization Black Ghost has transformed these 9 humans into cybernetic soldiers. The problem is, nobody asked them.
We were kidnapped off the street so you could remodel us.
There's no escape. Surrender to your fate.
Cyborg 009.